All right, today we're cracking open a cold case file from the world of psychology. And our lead detective, none other than the pioneering psychologist Carl Jung. The crime scene is the human mind itself, and the central mystery is why we forget. We're going to follow the clues that Jung uncovered to reveal the hidden forces that literally shape what we remember and what our minds are actively trying to hide.
So let's start with a question that, let's be honest, we have all asked ourselves. You're in the middle of a story, and a name, a place, a simple fact that you absolutely 100% know, it's right there on the tip of your tongue, and then, poof, gone. It's so frustrating, right? Well, that universal, maddening experience is the very mystery Carl Jung set out to solve over a century ago.
You know, Jung wasn't content with just calling it forgetting. He gave this common mental glitch a pretty serious scientific name, a disturbance of reproduction. For him, this wasn't just a passive failure of your memory banks. He saw it as an active disturbance, a disruption. Something was getting in the way, actively interfering. But what?
And this brings us right to the prime suspect in his investigation. Jung had this radical theory for the time. He believed these memory failures weren't random at all. He argued they were caused by something he called the psychological complex. So what on earth is a complex? Well, think of it like a tangled up knot of ideas and memories, all supercharged with emotion. And it's all buried deep in your unconscious mind. So, for example, someone with a really deep-seated failure complex might find themselves constantly forgetting the names of successful people they meet. But here's the crucial part. Jung believed these complexes can act on their own, almost like little subpersonalities, influencing what we do without us even realizing it.
Okay, so here's the absolute heart of his idea. Jung proposed that when we try to access a memory, an activated complex can literally jump in the way and interfere, blocking our ability to get to that information. The emotional energy of the complex basically hijacks the whole mental process. A totally innocent word could trigger it, and bam, our memory gets short-circuited. Now look, having a cool theory is one thing. But back in his day, the scientific community was really skeptical of all this psychoanalysis stuff. Jung needed more. He needed hard, cold, scientific evidence. He had to take his idea out of the realm of subjective theory and prove it as an objective fact. And that was the massive challenge, right? How do you measure something that by its very definition is unconscious and invisible? You can't just put a complex under a microscope. So Jung had to come up with a really clever way to hunt for its fingerprints at the scene of the crime. And his solution was honestly just genius. He realized he could find objective, measurable clues in a person's behavior during a simple word association test. He'd say a word, they'd say the first thing that came to mind. But here's the brilliant part. The most important clue wasn't what they said, but how long it took them to say it. That little delay, that reaction time, that could be the key. So let's dig into the evidence. Jung started to meticulously collect data, treating every single response not just as a word, but as a critical data point in his investigation. His whole goal was to prove that these delays in response were anything but random. And this is the first major bombshell he uncovered. He ran these word association tests, and then later, he'd ask people to try and remember their own responses. What he found was staggering. When a person failed to remember their answer, 62.2% of the time, almost 2/3 of the time, it happened on a word that had made them hesitate, a word that had a longer than average reaction time. And this data came from his study of 28 different people, a pretty diverse group. As you can see from the numbers, the link is just undeniable. A long reaction time was like a huge flashing red light for a future memory slip. This was the very first objective link, the first measurable piece of evidence. The complex was leaving a trail. But, he didn't stop there. He noticed another pattern. These memory failures, these disturbances, they weren't just scattered randomly throughout the tests. No, they tended to clump together in a series, one right after another. This suggested that there was a single, persistent cause that was being triggered and then staying active. And the data on this was just as powerful. Get this. He found that nearly 64% of all the memory errors happened in these little clumps, or series. For Jung, this was the classic signature of a complex. Once it gets activated, its influence just lingers, messing with the next few associations. It wasn't a single glitch. It was more like a wave of interference. To really nail this down, his analysis got super detailed. It was almost like psychological forensics.
He'd isolate one of these series of mistakes, then he'd compare the reaction time right at the start of that error series to the reaction time for the word just before it. And time after time, he observed this consistent, distinct spike in reaction time right at the moment the disturbance began. It was proof.
And all of this led him to his big conclusion, what you could call the smoking gun of his investigation. In his own words, in the main, the disturbance in reproduction is correlated with a prolonged reaction time. He had done it. He had established, through objective data, this powerful connection between a measurable physical reaction and a hidden psychological event.
Okay, so reaction time was the main piece of evidence, right? But to build a completely airtight case, Jung knew he needed more. He needed corroborating witnesses, other objective signs that a complex was at work. And he found them. He started cataloging what he called complex characteristics. These were other observable, objective behaviors. You know, stuff like repeating the word he just gave them, slips of the tongue, completely misunderstanding the word, or even weird little exclamations like saying yes out of nowhere. These weren't subjective interpretations. They were things anyone in the room could see and record.
And this led to the final and, for me, the most jaw-dropping piece of evidence. Jung actually counted how many of these complex signs, the slips, the repetitions, appeared for each word association, and his finding was just incredible. The associations that would later be forgotten showed, on average, more than twice as many of these objective signs. The complex wasn't just delaying the reaction, it was causing this whole constellation of observable disturbances. So you really have to understand what a huge deal this was. It created a true paradigm shift. Before Jung, forgetting was seen as just a random brain glitch, a passive failure. But his evidence showed it was a structured process. Those memory errors weren't meaningless. They were meaningful clues pointing to something deeper. Forgetting wasn't passive. It was the result of active interference from a hidden architect inside our own minds.
And so, the final verdict was in, loud and clear. Jung proved that those frustrating moments of forgetting are not just random noise. They are clear, objective signals. They're signposts pointing directly to the emotionally charged complexes that secretly shape our mental world, govern our attention, and get in the way of our memory. And that leaves us with a provocative final thought. The next time a word is on the tip of your tongue and it just won't come, don't just dismiss it as a random glitch. Ask yourself, what might that forgotten word be connected to? What hidden complexes, what hidden architects of your inner world might be making their presence known?